Once, there was a husband and a wife who wanted more than anything to have a baby. After many years, the wife became pregnant and they were overcome with joy. They lived near a garden with beautiful smelling flowers and herbs, but they could not go into the garden because it belonged to a powerful sorceress. Even before she was pregnant, the wife had hungered for the delicious leafy greens growing in the sorceress's garden, especially the soft and earthy tasting Rapunzel. However, now that she was pregnant, she longed for it even more. Her cravings were mysteriously strong, and it was as though nothing else could satisfy her. She grew weak and tired. In fear of his wife's condition, but this time, the sorceress was waiting for him. "How dare you steal my precious Rapunzel!" she shouted. The husband sank down to his knees and begged for forgiveness. "You will pay for what you've done," the sorceress said, "but not with your life. Instead, I will take your child. When she is born, I will appear." The husband was left to weep in the darkness of the garden, wondering why the sorceress was so sure his child would be a girl. True to her word, the sorceress appeared the very moment the baby girl arrived in this world. "I shall call her Rapunzel," she said. And before her parents could even lay eyes on her, the sorceress wrapped the baby up and took her deep into the forest. Rapunzel grew into a beautiful girl with a voice like a bell and a long mane of hair that was soft yet strong. Her beauty so frightened the sorceress that she locked Rapunzel in a high tower with no stairs or doors. The only opening in the tower was a small window at the top. When the sorceress came to visit Rapunzel, she would call, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And down to the bottom, Rapunzel would drop her long braid like a rope, so the sorceress could climb to the top. One spring morning, a young prince riding his horse through the woods passed a tall tower that he thought was empty until he heard a beautiful song coming from a small window near the top. He paused to listen before continuing his ride home. He stayed in that forest for weeks and returned every morning to hear the woman's song. He wanted to knock on the door and meet her, but finding no door was left to wonder. "She must be beautiful," the prince said, "because she sounds beautiful." He was turning to head home one morning when he saw the sorceress approach the tower. He and his horse hid behind an old oak tree. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," called the sorceress, and down came a thick braid. The prince watched in amazement as the sorceress climbed up the tower using the braid as a rope. The next morning, the prince returned to the forest with a plan. He went below the tower and, disguising his voice as that of the powerful sorceress, cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." A heavy braid dropped down, and the prince climbed up to the window. It was unclear who was more surprised, Rapunzel, who knew only the sorceress, or the prince, who was greeted at the window by the most beautiful person he had ever seen. Rapunzel's initial fear turned to curiosity as she listened to the prince explain himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to trick you, but I wanted to meet you, and this was the only way." The prince told Rapunzel about the outside world, and she saw that he was good. Once she began to tell the prince about her life in the tower, she couldn't stop. Her words tumbled out like her braid out the window, and the prince loved her more. The prince and Rapunzel decided to flee together, and the prince left to find a long rope for their escape. Rapunzel paced the floor of the tower with an aching worry. What if the sorceress caught the prince returning to the tower? But the prince returned steadfastly with the rope and clambered up the tower once again on Rapunzel's beautiful golden hair. The pair got to work, knotting the rope to one of the 2 iron lantern hooks on the tower walls. As Rapunzel took one last look at the living quarters that were her only home, she heard the sorceress approach. Rapunzel's eyes grew wide with panic at the familiar sound. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" Suddenly, a brilliant idea struck Rapunzel. She grabbed the prince's sword and chopped off her long braid of hair, then quickly fastened it to the other iron hook. She looked at the prince and he knew just what to do. He tossed the rope out of the south-facing window as Rapunzel tossed her braid of hair down the north-facing window where the sorceress waited. They quickly scurried out of the tower, one right behind the other, hoping the rope would hold their weight. As soon as their feet touched the ground below, they ran as fast as they could to the edge of the forest, where the prince's horse was waiting for them. They heard the blood-curdling screech of the sorceress as she discovered there was no Rapunzel at the end of the braid. As Rapunzel mounted the horse behind the prince, she turned quickly to see the sorceress scurrying down the rope. "Quickly!" she cried. The horse flew through the forest, the sorceress pursuing in an angry tirade. Branches scraped at their faces and arms as the witch willed the forest to slow their escape. As soon as the horse leapt across the creek and up the embankment, the prince knew they were safe, for the narrow body of water marked the borderline of his kingdom. And in his kingdom, the sorceress's dark magic lost all its power. "Rapunzel, without me you will age and die like all mortals," the sorceress yelled in a desperate plea. "I feel as though this is the first day of my real life," Rapunzel said, touching her short crop of hair. "And I will live it to the fullest." With that, the prince pointed his horse towards home. Upon arriving in the prince's kingdom, Rapunzel was welcomed as a princess and a heroine. With her wits, her courage, and the love of her prince, Rapunzel freed herself from a life of lonely imprisonment. Her story was told far and wide and sent an important message to damsels in distress everywhere. The power is within you. From then on, Rapunzel kept her golden hair short, and they lived happily ever after.